Craig, welcome back.
Max, great to visit with you again.
Bull market in gold is back, and you've been a keen observer of these markets for many years and gave us great insight to what's happening. Now, Trump is escalating the trade war with China. He's calling Jay Powell an enemy of the state. Seems to have ignited gold to rocket higher. What do you expect by the end of 2019, and what about 2020? Let's start there.
First of all, if people aren't watching the Keiser Report here in 2019, they're missing out, because if you watch CNBC or Bloomberg, they all act as if nobody saw this coming. You know, so, how could the bond market be rallying and the yield curve inverting and gold going up? Max, you and I have been talking about this since January, and we've talked every time about how 2019 is going to look a lot like 2010, with not the Fed not raising rates, but the Fed cutting rates as we slip into recession, and then more QE and negative interest rates and all of this stuff, driving gold to its best year since 2010, and here we are. I mean, this year is just crazy, and you just simply have to own gold in all its forms. And as the world realizes that, and as assets are allocated to gold and precious metals and the mining shares, things are just going to look better and better for all of us.
Now, Mark Carney stood on U.S. soil last weekend and trashed the U.S. dollar. So this is interesting, because here you have a central banker that's breaking ranks with the other central banks. And usually they work together and coordinate their policies. There's a lot of collusion going on, but there seems to be breaking now. It was a remarkable moment in the history of fiat. Do you think he's right that the world needs to replace the U.S. dollar as a unit of account?
And you and I, and most folks that are pay close attention to this, we've been talking about this now for the past decade. You know, the fact that this exorbitant privilege that the U.S. has had since the end of World War II is a transitory thing. I mean, before the U.S., the British pound was the reserve currency. And then you go back before that, and you had Portugal had it, you know, and you go back further, and it was China. I mean, this is something that the world has switched that mantle every 100 years or so, literally for centuries. And it is soon going to be the U.S.'s turn to switch. The thing that probably concerns me the most every time we talk about this is that typically that doesn't take place peacefully. You know, we're seeing the U.S. employ this mantra by force throughout the world, trying to keep the world's reserve currency status, because if we lose it, and when we lose it, all those trillions and trillions of dollars that have been printed for the last, really 40 plus years, almost 50 years since Nixon closed the gold window, all those dollars that are incubated in the U.S. Treasury market and in the foreign currency reserves of all of our trading partners, a lot of those are going to come home. And when you have a sudden supply of anything, I mean, widgets, you name it, apples, oranges, if there's a sudden supply of it that hits the market and demand stays the same or demand falls, you get a sharp drop in the value. And that ultimately is what's coming home to the U.S. eventually. But it was shocking to hear. I mean, think about it. I mean, they're throwing a party, basically, the Fed is, to talk about how great they are and to talk about central banking in general, and to have a competitor, if you will, the Bank of England, show up and stand in front of everybody and say, well, yeah, your currency is going on the dustbin of history. We got to have a new paradigm. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable thing to have had happen. And that's just another crazy thing that happened last Friday.
As far as replacing the dollar, you know, there's a couple of candidates. There's the special drawing right from the IMF that's been bandied about by thought leaders who suggest that could be the replacement for the U.S. dollar. Yeah. Mark Carney himself suggested a new cryptocurrency, like a crypto Bancor type currency. I mentioned Libra, I believe, the Facebook currency that's in development, as being something that could be emulated. He's talking about crypto and virtual currencies as a replacement. Is this one step closer to Mark Carney going full Bitcoin advocate, like we've seen Joe Kernan at CNBC and a few others? Once they get the bug, then they become Satoshi's drones, as I like to call them. Is Mark Carney about to go full-blown Bitcoin maximalist?
I don't have an informed opinion on that. When the world starts wondering about Bitcoin, I just wonder what you think. And I know you think we're going to 28,000, then on to 100,000. You know, and we've seen, you know, this notion Bitcoin could become some type of reserve currency. But in terms of market cap, I mean, it's just a fraction of what even gold is. And so I would think that if Bitcoin or some type of virtual currency is headed that direction, the price of it is going to have to be considerably higher